In the second week, we will be looking at the question that I had asked in week one and that you have already discussed, namely, what is the most insightful contribution of unificationism to peace studies? What is the greatest contribution that unificationism offers that you cannot find somewhere else? Hence the title, what kind of peace does unificationism propose? So that means there are many different types of peace, and we've already seen that, yes, peace can take various shapes and forms. It can be short, it can be long, it can be deep, it can be superficial, etc. It can be spontaneous, it can be sincere. So if you look at one of the most important books, collections of speeches by true parents, the one called Pyeonghwa, which is the scripture about peace, Pyeonghwa meaning peace in Korean, you will see without much surprise that peace appears 6,880 times, plus peaceful, peacefully, and so on. So maybe something like 7,000 times, more than 7,000, which makes it second only to the word love. And obviously, love is very central. It's the source of everything, and also you can say it's the source of peace. So this is not a surprise. Now let's go over to other unificationist writings. But first, we can make one observation. Peace is presented, it's at the bottom here, as something whose solution is here. That is very specific to unificationism, uh, especially when the founders speak about peace. They don't speak about it as something we should aim for, try to figure out how we can reach it, and so on. Of course, practically speaking, there's a lot of research needed and many attempts and so on. But conceptually, what is peace is presented as something that's clear. That is the source of peace. That's the first contribution. The second point that is constantly made is it's here now. It's not a solution that's always been there. It's a solution that finally is available today, and it is urgent to apply it. Otherwise, the chance may disappear. So, solution is here. It's urgent to apply it. So these 2 points are very strongly present. And I think all of us feel that way, at least all of us who have been working somehow within the sphere of unificationism. Now, in the introduction to the Pyeonghwa, which was written by whoever the editor was, you have this sentence, statement, in presenting principles for the resolution of conflict, conflict resolution on all levels, whether within ourselves or between nations, true parents' words challenge leaders to look beyond their disciplinary, religious, and national boxes and to view the world as one family under God. So we will see that this is actually really central to the view or perspective on peace that we have in unificationism. And then again, I'm sure that you have already noticed that. And so it's right to have that right at the beginning of the Pyeonghwa. Now, if you look at other unificationist publications, there are some surprises. First, it's secondary, but still interesting to note and surprising. The New World Encyclopedia, which was also founded by the founders of HTI, did not, until last year, have an entry for peace. It had Peace Corps, Peace Cup, Peace of Westphalia, various kinds of pieces and peace-related expressions, but peace didn't exist. Now, today, that when I looked again to make sure it hadn't changed, well, it had actually changed. Now there is an entry for peace, but it's just a few sentences. And it's really very much what you would find in any dictionary on the meaning of peace, very general, and then referring to these other special expressions. So I would call that just surprising because peace is so important to us. Now, much more significant is what you have on the left, the foundational book on the teachings of Unificationism. Of course, you can say now it's a historical book. We have Champumolon and there are many other things, but nevertheless, this remains the foundational document, right? And in the exposition of the divine principle, the word peace appears exactly 6 times. Six, that's almost nothing. And twice you have peacefully. Now, these are at least two of them that are particularly significant. The first one says the give and take actions between husband and wife in a family, among people in a society, between the government and citizens in a nation, and among the nations of the world are essential for them to live together in harmony and peace. Love, peace, harmony centered on heart. It makes perfect sense. So it's there right from the beginning. And then there's also a quote, it's actually a quote from the Bible that is there in the divine principle. Wonderful counselor, mighty God, everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Meaning already there, Isaiah, that's the Old Testament, the Messiah was presented as being many things, the Son of God, mighty God, even, etc., but also Prince of Peace. In other words, peace has always been there as something that humankind was longing for and that God had to bring, the Prince of Peace. So these two quotes among 6 show that it's there, it's foundational, it's essential, it has been recognized, just not emphasized. The words that were emphasized in these early days were love, uh, principle, harmony, heart, etc. Now, if you go on to unification thought, which is a philosophical presentation or elaboration on the divine principle, and also first an old version of the divine principle from the 50s, 1957. You will see how these concepts of peace, love, and harmony really you cannot detach them from one another. So in the old version of the divine principle, you have the purpose for which the universe was created is to have man in the sense of humankind, feel joy and peace. So it's there again. Now, in unification thought, you have a definition of heart. Heart, or Shimjong in Korean, is the core of God's song. It is the emotional impulse to seek joy through love. So in the first one, you have joy and peace. The second one, joy and love. So love is also related to peace indirectly, even just in these quotes. And the third one, also from New Essentials of Unification Thought, a life of true love means an altruistic life, a life for others. Life of service, a life lived for the sake of others, and a life lived by pleasing others with a warm heart. So again, heart, love for others. That is all connected. So I put these 3 together so that you can really see that right from the beginning, they are connected and they are all included. But for reasons that I've briefly explained already in the first week, peace itself as a word was not very much used. It was acknowledged and understood, but it was not very much used because of the situation which required for the creation of a foundation for the unification movement or unification church, and the fact that we did not have yet any means to counter destructive forces that used peace or the word of peace in a destructive way. That came, the use of peace in everyday language for unificationism came later, starting in 73 with the Professors World Peace Academy. Now, if you look at the glossary by the United Nations University for Peace in Costa Rica, it gives you these much more, I would say, pedestrian or much more everyday definitions of peace. Political conditions that ensures justice and social stability through formal and informal institutions, practices, and norms. That's what we have already found in the course on peace and conflict studies. It's a very, I would say, technical, political definition of peace. Several conditions must be met for peace to be reached and maintained. Balance of political power, legitimacy for decision makers, trusted institutions, a sense of equality and respect. All that is, yeah, quite technical, strategic, essential, but it doesn't touch the bottom of the human mind that wants peace. The closest you have here is respect. You respect somebody, but usually when you say to somebody, I respect your opinion, it means I disagree with you. I disagree, but I respect that you can think differently from me. So it's not a wholehearted embrace. So that's what peace is, and everyday language and in peace and conflict studies circles. And I continue. Notoriously elusive. Peace connotes more than a mere absence of war or hostilities. That means not just negative peace. An absence of conflict is impossible. That's another statement. It's inevitable. Conflict is inevitable, which unification thought we'll look at and discuss. In addition, the state of peace should be distinguished from techniques that simply avoid conflicts or employ violent or coercive approaches to engage in, manage, or resolve them. These days, we hear a lot about world peace and the way peace is being sometimes almost practically imposed in some countries, or at least the plan is there for that. It may be good or bad. In any case, this statement touches on the point that it cannot be just that. Peace in the Western world is generally considered a contractual relationship that implies mutual recognition and agreement. Here again, it's strategic, it's a contract, I don't hate you, you don't hate me. Again, very far from the heart of love and unconditional love and all that. So it's good to know there's a big difference. And it continues. Understandings of peace throughout the world often disclose also a much deeper comprehension of peace in relation to the human condition. So finally, we are getting there. That is more than just what we saw. Even again, this is from the glossary of the University for Peace, which also includes inner peace. Inner peace. Question is, what is inner peace? How do we achieve inner peace? But at least inner peace is acknowledged as to be something necessary. The comprehensive understanding of peace outlined above extends beyond what are referred to as positive conceptions of peace. So it's more than just positive peace, negative peace, just no fighting, positive peace, even beyond that, but acts in accordance with them as well. This contrasts with negative conceptions of peace, which are described most commonly as the mere absence of war or violent conflict. So you can see how this leads already further. In other words, We are not the first to realize that real peace goes beyond. We have seen already in the Old Testament the Prince of Peace, Jesus, or the Messiah that was expected to come, was not announced as someone who would come as a peace negotiator, would, negotiate with the other side. The bringer of peace. So, having said that, let us look a little bit at the different types of peace that have exist from the worst to the best being the one that is new. So the first piece is a series of Latin expressions that reveal to something that is not really peace. The most famous one that is used in history books is Pax Romana. That means, for those who are intuitive, Roman peace. That was 2000 years ago, the peace that the Roman Empire had been able to establish, or I would say to impose, on essentially the Mediterranean basin, North Africa to all the way to Germany, actually. There was peace, but that was peace that's not really peace in blue, but a power monopoly and the tool of oppression. In other words, Rome dominated everything. They did so by war, by defeating militarily with lots of loss of life everybody else, and maintaining that power with an iron fist. So nobody had the capacity to fight really against Rome. So that gave some kind of a peaceful period of a few hundred years. But is that peace? So I put a question mark, because in a way it was peaceful. There was no conflict, but it was maintained by force or coercion. You have no choice. And obviously, as soon as that overwhelming force becomes a little bit weak, and then eventually disappears, fighting starts all over again. So it's not really peace. Now you have also Pax Ecclesiae, the peace of the church, which originally meant a period in the year when there was no war, or where wars were suspended, but it takes on the meaning of the peace that by its authority the church has been able to impose in periods like the Middle Ages, because it had also total control, or nearly total control, of much of the population. Then you have the Pax Americana today, the peace imposed more or less by the United States as a world power, or the dominant world power. Of course, that peace was challenged by the Soviet version, Pax Sovietica, which over its part of the world, the one that it controlled, also exerted a certain domination that by force created peace. I mean, nobody dared to fight back. Well, actually, some did, and in Afghanistan eventually, but that was towards the end. That was the end of the Pax Sovietica. And then today, people speak also of the Pax Sinica, which also applies to the old days of the Chinese Empire. Again, large empires that in their area or even worldwide have so much authority that they can impose peace by force. Now, again, there's a question mark, because, for instance, about the fact that it's not really peace, because at the end of World War II, we can say that by creating the United Nations and a few other actions, the United States in particular did create or impose a certain peace, because it had just defeated Japan and Germany with help from others, but it was the central dominant power. And it was in a position to force the world to be at peace temporarily, and then create institutions that hopefully would lead to all countries to voluntarily live in peace in the future. So you could say that's actually not so bad. It's not so bad, but uh, it's just the beginning. Now, if you go next, you reach the types of peace that are really peace as they are discussed in peace studies. And I'm moving on to the next slide. From stable to unstable peace, and so on until durable peace. On the right, you have the famous Lund's curve. Um, that is a curve that shows how human society can move from lasting peace, or it's called durable peace, means this, it lasts, yeah, to war and all the in between. So it can go up and down and up and down. So we start with durable peace. It's a peace that lasts. But obviously, it doesn't last forever because it can easily change to barely stable peace where people, the nations are already having difficulties with each other, but they manage them. So they disagree on certain things, but they manage it well, and they have good exchanges and they live with each other. They know that they don't agree on all, but things are okay. Then further degradation of the situation leads to unstable peace. It still works, but the moments, the difficult moments, the issues where suddenly there's a near explosion, where a clash, at least of opinions, that is so strong that there's some kind of a worry that it might go further. That's unstable peace. You never know exactly where that will go. But still, minimally, somehow it works. You have that China and the United States today, for instance. And then you have, going down one step further, crisis situation. Crisis means, red lights flashing, anything can happen any moment. You actually expect that it will happen. You just don't know when, and you desperately try to avoid it. And then, of course, the next step is when it actually happens, that's war. And once that happens, then through negotiations and so on, you try to bring it down back to crisis, still very tense, but no longer fighting, negative peace, if you will, and then go back for until you have, hopefully, again, a durable peace. So that's something that is discussed in the course on conflict analysis and transformation that some of you must have already taken, or maybe you're taking it now. And so I don't need to discuss it any further. But what's interesting is really durable peace, that a peace that lasts. Sounds like, permanent peace, but you can already see here there's interruption when things go up towards war. In other words, even the most durable peace is not permanent peace. And a good example that I give usually when I teach this course, and that this time after the year 2025 and at the beginning of 26 takes on a new meaning. The example is the United States and Canada. These two countries are so close to each other and so similar in so many ways, even though there are differences. They are constantly interacting with each other. So they are two different countries. So theoretically, they could fight because it's not just one country. But practically, they are so close. The idea that they could fight doesn't come to mind. You smile when you think of a possible war between Canada and the United States, right? Well, now you know how quickly a situation that seemed so stable and so durable, so much lasting, almost permanent, can change because the solution is not fundamental. So the buds or the seeds of conflict are already there, even in that kind of situation. Now, of course, today still Canada and US are very much at peace, but the simple fact that they start speaking the way they have been speaking to each other, and I don't want to give you to waste time by giving you details that you know, that's a sign that, wow, things can indeed change. Nothing is guaranteed as long as we don't have a fundamental solution to the problem of conflict. So then one step further beyond just lasting or durable peace is perpetual peace. That's Immanuel Kant, which Many of you have already studied my last course. Perpetual means eternal, and in German, that's actually the word that Kant uses. That means literally forever. So that's much more. However, Kant presents it as a vision, not as a reality, something to aim for. And he says it can be achieved. That's the miracle of that somebody 200 years ago could have that vision. And he called it the kingdom of God on earth. Incredible. However, even he said it's only an approximation because human beings will always have a tendency to prefer themselves over others. We can call that selfishness. And because of that, there will always be a little something preventing that peace from being really absolute, complete peace, like the kingdom of God. So it's a great vision, but what's lacking is what can change the fact that humans will always have a tendency, nevertheless, to be self-centered and to fight each other, even though it's mostly controlled. Well, that's the last step that Unificationism calls Chaneguk, or Kingdom of Heaven. And it's just a word that we're familiar with. Now, the question is, we have to unpack that expression and try to see what is inside. So you have this at the bottom here. Chaneguk is actually a short, condensed version of a longer expression, Chanju Pyongwa Tongilguk, the nation of cosmic peace and unity. So, and again, it is presented as something that has become possible just now, not today or yesterday, but during our lifetime for those among us who are a little bit older. And because it's there, it's urgent. And I guess today and early 26, it's not difficult to understand the sense of urgency. Now, I will apparently go back uh, to the lowest form of peace, but just to show something. Truce, not truth, but truce, Truce, is a very short interruption in fighting on the occasion of a holiday, like in the Russian-Ukraine war. Russia suggested over Christmas, I think, or some other holiday, let's have a 3-day truce, which of course never held. But in this example that I'm showing here is a very special kind of truce, a truce that was not decided upon by the military leaders or the governments of the countries that were in conflict. Okay, for 3 days we stop, and everybody stopped and then started fighting again. This was a spontaneous outburst of the longing for peace on both sides. This was Christmas 1914, the first Christmas of World War I, where the soldiers on the German side and on the French side, where you also had British soldiers, they were in trenches, you dig a trench and then you hide, and then you come out briefly to shoot at the enemy and you duck again, or you throw a hand grenade and hope that it hits, and so on, causing incredible amounts of death and sickness and just absolute horror. But on that Christmas day, I don't know, I'm not sure even that anybody knows how it started, but rather spontaneously on both sides, soldiers, not commanders, soldiers signaling to each other, hey, this is Christmas, guys, let us celebrate Christmas together. We're all Christians, Europe. And they did. Uh, for the first one to come out, it must have taken lots of courage. And well, obviously he wasn't shot. The others came out too. And they celebrated. There are various pictures you see, one with Christmas tree, they were singing Christmas carols, and here they had a soccer game. You see three different types of uniforms here. That's the German with this thing on, and then the French and the British. They did that for a few days, and then their commanders were very upset and said stop, and it never happened again. But why do I mention that here? Because that was a spontaneous longing for real peace, even though it was very short, but it shows that in the heart of people, there is that desire to have peace, not to fight. And when some special occasion gives just that little additional push to that desire of the heart that both sides have, this kind of thing happens. So it's not much more than a sign because it didn't affect the war that continued for 4 years, but it shows that it's in the heart, not just in the negotiations. Now, as we've already seen, peace is difficult to define. It has many elements, but especially the key element that can make the difference is hard to identify. And then once it's identified, it's very hard to realize. Unificationism wants to address both challenges. There's really no need to explain, oh, now I understand. That's what peace is, but we can't do it. So both are our task. Now, I will go further into the definitions of peace, leading to the key element of peace from the unificationist perspective. So the first one is summarized by the title of a book. Peace is more than the absence of war. That you will hear all the time. It defines, you could say, it says peace is more than just negative peace, it's positive peace, not just the absence of war, but something more. It has been attributed to just about everybody from the Pope to George Bush to, I've seen it, everybody takes credit for it, but it's a meaningful statement. But of course, before there's more, there should be at least no fighting. And then the contents are, some of it we've already seen, inner peace, harmonious development, mutual agreement, cooperation, safety, rule of law, justice, and so on, and the fulfillment of one's potential. Please keep that one in mind, fulfillment of one's potential. If I ask you, what is that? I think we all have a pretty immediate sense of what it is. I want to fulfill my potential. Oh, yeah, because there's things that I would like. I know I could do that, but I don't have a chance or something like that. But if you want a more precise or complete or deep definition of what that fulfillment of one's potential is, it's a little bit murky. And people can disagree strongly on it. And that's why, as is, it's not exactly satisfactory, not fully. Then just a reminder of negative peace and positive peace is a distinction that appeared in 1954 with these expressions were coined by two largely forgotten peace academics, Quincy Wright and Fred Cottrell, and popularized 10 years later in an article by Johann Galtung, the great old man of peace studies. Negative peace is, I'm not going to read it, is the mere absence of war. Just today, they are not shooting. So it's peace, but it'll start again tomorrow. Positive peace is nonviolent and creative conflict transformation. So you don't only solve the problem, but you transform the relationship of hostility into one of friendship and collaboration, or creating conditions that make war or conflict unnecessary. Why would you fight with somebody you love? It involves constructive steps towards human well-being, no structural or cultural violence. Okay. Please remember that one as well. Human well-being. I would say just like fulfilling one's potential, human well-being is something that seems to be obvious. You will immediately have something in your mind if somebody asks you what is human well-being. But then again, what does it really mean? Of course, not to be hungry, not to be thirsty, feeling well, but on what level? It's not altogether clear, especially what is the root or what is the most fundamental need that makes you feel good, that gives you human well-being. And next point that I wanted to make is transcendence. Let me explain. Johan Galtung has written a book, among others, called Transcend, Transform. He speaks about what he calls the transcend method. And what he says is actually very common sense. On that one, I must say, he's right. Uh, Period. Yes, right. If you want to make peace, you need to transcend the perspective of both sides. And he said it doesn't have to be God, it doesn't have to be this, just something that transcends a perspective, a point of view that is higher than the one of A or B. Because if you stick with just one of the two, then the other one will never accept it. So something that's higher, that embraces both and allows both to come together, centered, we would say, on that transcendent element. So that is very much true, and that is indeed at the heart of any effort to create peace. But how to proceed to achieve that? Now, another scholar who wrote a very interesting article that you will have to read this week. His name is Jolot, but he's Swedish. He said the notion of peace advocated by the schools of realism, liberalism, and critical theory all rest on the unwanted advocacy of violence. So what he's saying is that indeed, and then he suggests we need to find transcendence, the need to return to the notion of transcendence. So he brings the same point as Galtung brings up that same point as an answer. But first, what is realism, liberalism, and critical theory? Realism, we have seen that in the course on peace and conflict studies, is the perspective in politics that basically it's hopeless to try to have sincere peace between the nations because the tendency to dominate and national interest will always be more important. So you have to be realistic, but in a not so nice way. Uh, and so peace can only be imposed by essentially being stronger than the other side and using that as a diplomatic leverage. Real liberalism, on the other hand, or idealism, it's more complex than that, but simplifying, is the view that there are some ideals that can be appealed to and that can be implemented. The United Nations is based on that, human rights, etc., etc. So that's not, it's much better. However, this author says, however, when liberalism tries to implement peace in the name of democracy, freedom, etc., it often does it in a way that directly contradicts itself and leads back to violence. And as an example, you have George W. Bush after 9/11, the Twin Towers and so on. He invaded Afghanistan and then invaded Iraq in order to create a peaceful democracy in these countries, but creating it by means of power. And if you are not too young, you remember that your parents strongly opposed that idea and said it's not the right way to do. And many others oppose it too, because it's indeed contradictory to impose peace by force. Critical theory, that's essentially the Marxist perspective that says that peace is not there because injustice, social injustice is being imposed on the category of the population that creates violence. And in other, it creates the possibility for an explosion of violence. And well, the advocacy is these situations have to be changed, and if needed, and usually it's needed, by violent revolution. So that's again, you create peace by violent revolution. All that doesn't really work. And again, these two authors emphasize it should be replaced by the notion of transcendence. Again, of course, there is a time where violence is inevitable. World War II, when the other side fights, there's no choice. But to achieve real peace, transcendence is needed. So that's the third thing I ask you to think of. What is transcendence? Generally, I explained it as coming from Galtung. We get it, but a little bit more than that. Think about it. So the unificationism offers answer. I was going to say tries to answer, but actually unificationism is quite confident in offering these answers. Now, you will have to discuss or evaluate whether you think that it's true to be, it's right to be confident about it, but definitely there's no hesitation. There is an answer, and it can be implemented. Uh, and in particular, the meaning of these three statements or expressions can be clarified. Fulfillment of one's potential. How can human potential be fulfilled? What does human well-being means, and how can it be achieved? And what is the source of that transcendence? They remain vague if they're left as they are, even though they are great points. Now, before I go to the over to the answer offered by unificationism, I will return to something again that we have seen in the course on peace and conflict studies, a very short article, but very insightful article by a peace scholar, regular peace scholar, Torren Hansen, teaches in the United States, where he identifies, among other things, that there are three interrelated branches to peace. Inner peace, peace within; relational peace, peace between people; and peace among, that means structural or environmental peace. These three branches of peace oppose three corresponding forms of harm. Self-harm, I harm myself in many possible ways; suicide, but I can also commit immoral acts and harm my soul, my spirit, and lose happiness. Relational harm when people fight, and environmental harm, what's happening today in the world. And we have been addressing this a lot in unificationism. So when you see that, what you think about, obviously, at least to me and to many others, the three blessings, right? Inner peace, that within myself; relational, for position foundation, and then with the environment. So this gentleman had a kind of incredible insight on this point. I don't know if he's a Christian. I tried to contact him, never succeeded. Maybe or probably is Christian, and he maybe referred to Genesis like the divine principle does. I don't know, but he got it right. It's not completely precise, but he essentially got it right. And here's the form that it takes in unificationism from the beginning to today. This has never changed. The three great blessings. And they are not the blessings, they are God's three blessings, or the three great blessings. And I will not discuss them further because the whole course will be about implementing that, realizing it. It's to be understood, but also to be realized. So our potential is fulfilled if we go through the three great blessings. Then we can have a potential as a human being, as one human being. I can be a true self, my true self, free in what I'm doing and happy. Then I can create a happy family, fulfillment of my potential on that new level, and experience what that means. And then relating to the world outside of me, I can have the full realization of my potential, and God realizes his potential, and it's the kingdom of God, or Chonilguk. So that answers that. Now, it sounds so beautiful, beautiful diagrams. And it's, of course, very hard to realize, but it is very clear. It is very clear in a way that it usually isn't. And you can do the same thing with transcendence. Here it's very clear it's God. Why is God transcendent? Because it's the original being. And how is he transcendent to us? He's our parent. And representing God, the parents can be also transcendent to their children. They can make peace with their children. And then, well-being, same thing as self-fulfillment. How can I feel well within myself if I fight between my mind and my body? But even if I don't fight, feel well within myself. But do I have full well-being? Like I said, did Jesus feel well fully? No. For that, you need to have your family. And even if you have a family, one family, but everything else around is completely messed up, will you have well-being? No. So again, this answers that question. So that's what I wanted to do today. You can say it's not much, but I think it at least clarifies right from the beginning where unificationism brings something new. And then each week from now on, we will discuss one specific point and how unificationists have tried to implement it and how their implementation has relates to other attempts that have been made. Thank you. Have a good week.